Hello, welcome to the Texas Legislative Update. I'm David Blackmon here with Jason Modglin, the president of the Texas Alliance of Energy Producers. Jason, how's it going in Austin today?
It's good. It's good, David. Happy to be with you, and happy Earth Day. We don't
Happy
say that
Earth Day.
enough in the oil and gas business. Providing the fuel and the resources needed to have a modern world. Yeah,
Are
it's
we
great to be
turning
with
out
you.
the lights for an hour tonight? Isn't that what we usually do on Earth Day or something like that? No, that's a different thing. That's anyway.
I, I plan to enjoy my
Yeah,
house and
me too.
maybe even have a burger or something. So yeah, probably all the things that they don't like. But yeah, it'll be a nice Friday.
It's also San Jacinto Day when we're recording this. God bless Texas on our state independence day 187 years ago today.
Well done.
Yeah, I always have to acknowledge that as a lifelong Texan. My God, I'm an eighth generation Texan. It's crazy. My
That's
my my
fantastic.
ancestors had babies young. Get through that many generations in 180 years. Okay, well, that's enough of that. Let's talk about what's been happening in the legislature. Well, let's start though with the fact that it looks like Ted Cruz, our senator, our senior senator, no, junior senator from the
Junior.
state of Texas, has picked up a likely challenger in State Senator Roland Gutierrez, who represents District 19 in San Antonio. So I guess that means the Democrats aren't going to let Beto O'Rourke become a three-time loser, huh?
That's potentially the case. Beto is quite a force, but I think Roland could give him a run for his money in the Democratic primary. Roland's pretty dynamic,
Right.
young attorney, and so it would be fun to see them go back and forth in that primary. And then he sounds pretty committed to running for the U.S. Senate,
Yeah.
and leaving the Texas Senate.
Well, if nothing else, it'd make for some really strong debates between the two. I agree with you. I think Mr. Gutierrez could be a pretty significant challenger. And so Senator Cruz will have to be on his game next year.
That's right. That's right.
So in the legislature, but enough of that. Legislature. First thing on my list is the Senate passed its own version of a budget plan for the next biennium, $308 billion in total, which I believe is slightly less than what the House passed. What are the big differences between the two that they're going to have to negotiate now?
Oh, there's not too many big differences. I think there's a lot of kind of placeholder conversations that are going to take place over the next 4 weeks or so through that conference committee, where there's been a lot of open questions. Certainly, education and how there is potentially school choice is certainly wrapped up in the budget. The House had voted, as they've done the past decade, on their opposition to state funds for any type of voucher program. That passed this year again in the House, but certainly by the narrowest margin that it's ever passed. And so that has some wind behind the sails, if you will, for school choice proponents. And that's certainly a part of the budget, and would be a big difference between the House and Senate. Both sides have appointed their conference committee, and so in the Senate, it's Senator Joan Huffman, who's the chair of the Finance Committee, Lois Kolkhorst, Brandon Creighton, Charles Swertner, and Robert Nichols. They'll all kind of divide up different parts of the budget. Normally, we work pretty closely with Robert Nichols during the conference committee. He kind of has natural resources over his purview. Senator Kolkhorst traditionally does health and human services. That's really been her strength, going back to her days in the House. Brandon Creighton will do education, and then Charles Swertner will be interesting, kind of how he and Nichols pair off. Schwertner, of course, is chairman of Business and Commerce Committee, which
Right.
has had purview over Public Utility Commission and ERCOT. And so it'll be an interesting dynamic to see how the two of them divide up some of the agencies that they have overlap with. And then on the House side, this is kind of shocking, but nice to see. I think they did this last time as well. Their conferees are matched up with their subcommittee chairs. So Chairman Greg Bonin, chair of House Appropriations, Mary Gonzalez, who has purview over general government and kind of the judicial system. J.C. Jatan is healthcare. Gary Van Dever is education, and then Armando Wally out of the Houston area is over the natural resources agencies, and so that's who we traditionally work with on Railroad Commission, TCEQ type issues. So we're excited that now the conferees are in place, and it's kind of a fascinating dynamic that unfortunately the public doesn't really get a viewpoint in. It's usually just two members kind of working out the issues with the Legislative Budget Board and with staff, kind of keeping the members on their toes and working through the process. Lobbyists aren't invited or allowed in the room either, and so it's a lot of telephone, if you will, hoping that what you start on one end ends up the same message on the other end. So
Right.
but it's always a fascinating process, and one I was honored to participate in several years ago, so look forward to the results there.
Well, we also had on property taxes quite a lot of back and forth between the House and the Senate this week. I know it caught my attention on the newscast because the average property tax bill appraisal in the Tarrant County where I live this year is going to rise by 18% in a single year. That's extraordinary. That's the most I've ever seen. And so this debate over cutting property taxes is pretty timely. We have any real progress on the issue, or just a bunch of rhetoric flying around?
there was a lot of rhetoric flying back and forth this week, and well timed, as you said. Those appraisal notices are hitting right now. Of course, people are reacting to that appraisal increase. It does not have your tax bill on that. They're looking at your appraisal.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I saw some folks reacting to Houston area appraisals that were up some 30%. I
Oh
have
my
not.
gosh.
I've been dreading going to look at mine this week in Austin. Of course, homeowners have the benefit of a 10% homestead exemption, which keeps your taxable value from growing more than 10%. And so that is a benefit for homeowners, but businesses are not included in that. Certainly, if you have any investment property or lake house or something like that, you get no benefit there. Appraisals are able
Right.
to drive your tax bill pretty considerably. And so the Senate has passed some really good legislation to lower people's property tax bills, compressing the school tax rate, increasing the homestead exemption, helping out seniors pretty considerably with a larger homestead exemption. And there's probably more money there for Texas homeowners in the Senate plan. And yet the House has said, what do we get phone calls about? We get phone calls about appraisals.
Yeah.
and we, that's really what people are fired up and angry about every year when they see that appraisal notice come. And so why don't we address appraisals with a 5% across the board appraisal cap? And so the House bill actually doesn't help you as much on dollars and cents, but certainly in out years, it will potentially save you a lot of money and
Right.
and avoid some of the just heartbreak, or not heartbreak, but anger right now every time you see your appraisal and getting ready to protest and challenge that appraisal. So the House sent their bills over, the Senate sent their bills over to the House. As you mentioned, there was some name calling back and forth this week between really just the lieutenant governor and some of the House leadership, describing this plan as kind of a California tax plan. Uh, that's true. I
The
mean,
ultimate insult.
it is true. We'd have to go back to the 1960s though, when Prop 1 passed there and really led to the Reagan Revolution in the 1960s in California. So,
Yeah.
I mean, everything is true that I'm saying. Everything is true that they're saying. It's just our eras and our kind of what we're arguing over are different things. Of course, that California proposal was to cap property tax growth at 1%. And it has been devastating to the California market. You have these bizarre trusts that people set up so that they can transfer property, so that they can avoid the tax bill, and it results in a pretty stagnant real estate market there, because people don't want to buy and sell for fear that your tax bill is going to get jacked up, and so I mean. I'm right there with the lieutenant governor on, yes, we need to avoid that. So it is a strange dynamic right now. I ultimately think both sides will work it out. They're in agreement on compressing the school property tax rate. If we can maybe get that up a little higher, or maybe increase the homestead exemption a little bit. And maybe there's the opportunity to look at homestead appraisals. It would be fantastic for businesses if we could somehow cap business appraisals. I cannot see that happening in the state of Texas. We are far too dependent on property taxes on business property. Businesses pay the majority of the property tax roll in the state, and that would be a very short-term item.
It sure would. Yeah.
You would not want to be in government
No, you would.
10 years trying to unwind that.
No, it's the only tax we have on the books that accounts for population and economic growth. And and to be fair to the taxing districts, much as I hate to do that, I mean, in Tarrant County, property values have gone up by at least 18% in the last year. And when I look at what I could list my home for, I look at my wife and think, why in the world are we still living here? Well, of course, you're still living here because you don't want to get a 6 or 7% mortgage instead of the 3% mortgage we have. But property values have gone up by that amount, and they're basically trying to capture that in the appraisals. Anyway, enough of that. Go back to making fun of government now. So the grow and strong bills that you talked about last week passed out of committee this week. Talk about
they
that.
They did a very quick turnaround. They were in House Appropriations on Monday morning. Some good testimony. I think I saw the Permian Basin Petroleum Association, Ben Shepard testified, and then James LeBas, who's a tax consultant, testified on behalf of Texas Oil and Gas Association. I was out in Wichita Falls. We had a golf tournament out there for our members, so I was running that direction. But lots of good testimony in support of those bills. It must have motivated the House Appropriations Committee, because they turned around and voted Thursday morning for both grow and strong. So now those head over to the House Calendars Committee, and we'll see ultimately which one they move forward, and then ultimately what the Senate decides to do with this. As we've covered before, kind of two different thought processes or game plans. Representative Craddock, who has passed this out of the House the past 2 sessions, this will be the third time around, is really focused on how many friends can we bring to the party? And so there's nearly 220. It's not quite the 220 counties in the state that generate oil and gas severance taxes from oil and gas production. And so this program would benefit every single one of those counties. Whereas Representative Landgraf has a different approach. He's trying to look at top 15% of those counties and really only benefit those counties because those counties have a higher impact, certainly
Right.
from oil and gas production. And so that doesn't benefit the entire state. It benefits about 30 counties pretty considerably. And then there's some other items in there for budget and appropriators that might have some interest there in terms of emissions reduction programs at TCEQ, state highway funds, some of the other kind of priorities of budget makers. And so potentially, there could be a trade-off in the Senate where they say, actually, we'd like to shore up some of these other programs, and this might be a way to do it while rewarding certain counties, but not all counties. And so kind of a two-pronged approach, and it'll be interesting what the Senate decides to do. They did not act on GROW the past two sessions.
Well, let's move on to the grid reforms. We had just a little tiny slight bit of action on Senate Bills 6 and 7 in the House. They were both finally referred this week to the State Affairs Committee there in the House, but no hearing yet on those bills, right? And nothing scheduled yet.
No hearing on those, but good to see those start to be referred to committee, and then that hopefully will break some log jam and move some things on both sides of the building. State Affairs Committee did have a very long hearing on Wednesday evening to look at the PCM guardrails bill. The PCM stands for Performance Credit Mechanism. This is what the PUC came up with in terms of shoring up our grid and enticing or inviting more capital investment in the state to build new generation. And rather than going the capacity market route, which is what a lot of the rest of the country has done, this is kind of a bolt on, if you will, to what we currently have, to hopefully pay for performance if they bring new resources to the market at a time of scarcity. And so it obviously only people only get paid if they bring that to market, rather than a capacity market paying them on the front end to have kind of standby service. So that's a key difference there. But I think legislators on both sides, Senate and House, wanted to have some guardrails on the program to make sure that there weren't cost overruns and things of that nature. Passed pretty quickly out of the Senate, and then was in the House. I think the generators also supported it in the Senate, and they were a little more critical in the House. And so I think that's some of the conversation or dynamic amongst those advocates and certainly House members is why the change of heart? What has happened in the course of the legislation? Was there an amendment added somewhere that may have changed their opinion of the legislation? So I think, as we've talked about before, the PCM is going to happen. There's no legislation out there that would prohibit the PUC from doing that.
Right.
And the governor has certainly endorsed that and called on that to occur at the Public Utility Commission. The only thing that could pass from the legislature or the legislative standpoint is a guardrail or some type of control over that program. And so if this bill doesn't pass, we'd have PCM without the protections, and that's probably not something that the legislature wants to allow happen. So I think they're going to work through this pretty quick.
Well, good. Then the question becomes whether the PCM is adequate. And And that's where Senate Bill 6 comes in, and we'll have that hearing and debate later in the session.
That's
Which,
right.
by
That's
the
right.
way, only has what,
About 40 days.
39 days left as of this recording. So,
Yeah.
40 days left. 40 days left. Okay, so where are we? What did you testify? Do any testifying this week, or what?
I
Did you
didn't
get
do
to
any
enjoy that?
testifying. I did a lot of driving this week. So, in my quest to keep up demand, I drove to Wichita Falls and had a great time, a golf tournament there with our members, and then drove to Tyler, Texas on Wednesday, and we had a nice little dinner there for some of our members and board members. Tyler's just beautiful right now.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And so I highly recommend it if anyone's thinking about a weekend road trip. It is very nice right now before it gets too hot. So I had a great time there, and then have been around the legislature Tuesday, Thursday, and then actually this morning as well. But thankfully did not need to testify on anything.
Well, it's nice to get a break from that, isn't it?
It's nice to get a break. Yeah.
Another bill I just wanted to ask you about is this House Bill 2127, which would enact some restrictions on the ability of cities to regulate business within their city limits. And I know this is something that's concerned the industry in the past. We had House Bill, or was it House Bill or Senate Bill 40 several sessions ago that limited their ability to regulate downhole operations in the oil and gas business. But I just wonder if this is a bill the industry is following closely.
Yes, you're recapping a lot of that perfectly. There was House Bill 40 by Representative Darby in the 2015 session. I was able and happy to work on that during
That's
that
right.
time.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
And so very much enjoyed that, and really it was a testament to the legislature putting their stamp on things, past some 130 to a very small minority on the other side, and really a great feat. This is a different bill. Some have called it the super preemption bill, and what it would do is it would prevent cities from adopting rules or ordinances that are in conflict or contrary to the state in a variety of different codes, and it just calls out whole codes. So let me run through them really quick: agriculture, civil practices, finance, insurance, labor, natural resources, and occupations. Of course, oil and gas is largely in the natural resources code, but we frequently interact with farmers and ranchers, and so that would be tied up in the agriculture code. And then occupations, well, that could be water well drillers or other types of businesses that are ancillary to oil and gas. Finance and insurance deals kind of right there with banking and insurance as well, and then obviously civil practices with your opportunity to go to the court. So it was a very long debate. Chairman Burrows is who's carrying it. He's out of the Lubbock area, Dustin Burrows, and really did a phenomenal job kind of fending off amendments, and then tried to push this forward. There is a Senate bill by Brandon Creighton, but it has been pending in the Senate Business and Commerce Committee, so unclear if the Senate would move forward on this legislation. But very much it will be new. There has been a lot of growth in cities and counties, and I think that really came out in the debate, and certainly what we had seen during House Bill 40. Cities or really local advocates want to address an issue. The city, for whatever reason, or the developer decides that they've got they've got no recourse at the state level to address those issues, and they go to the city, and rather than the city stating that that's outside their purview or their ability, they start to engage, and those types of actions by cities used to have to get ratified by the state, and so
Yeah.
they would pass them, and it would be conditional upon state ratification. And so they would come to the legislature in the 70s and 80s and even 90s and say, we've done this, and will you sign off on it? And actually, there's a committee in the House that is entirely for this purpose. It's called Urban Affairs. When I worked on it, it was called the Houston Committee, because all we did was Houston stuff. And so, you know, Houston would come in, they would say, we've got a labor agreement with our police or firefighters, or, you know, we've done something else, and we need the state to sign off on it. And that would be what that committee was designed to do. Somehow that process has been broken, and cities and counties have decided we're just going to forge ahead. And so it's resulted in several conflicts that tend to break out. Obviously, oil and gas in 2015. You may remember the Uber and Lyft issues from several
Yeah.
years ago here in Austin, where we're a bar city, you know, live entertainment city. And so one of the things that we have lots of problems with are DWIs, DUIs, and here comes Uber to help address that issue. And the city decides, well, we're just going to ban it. It doesn't make any sense. And so, you know, those types of things that the legislature has injected themselves into these issues. And I think Chairman Burrows has said, well, why are we doing this piecemeal? Let's just start to make it abundantly clear that these local governments can't inject themselves in these types of arrangements.
Yeah. And that's important for the business community, because if you don't restrict that, then you end up with this patchwork of different regulations in different cities and counties. And, you know, you never know what the rules are until you
That's
go
right.
in and start doing business. And it's, you know, it creates chaos in the business community. And you just can't have, not just oil and gas, but any kind of business. So anyway, that
Well,
one is an interesting bill.
and we have lots of local governments, and
Yeah, we
and
do.
it's not all in rural Texas where you're only dealing with one, you know, particularly in the metroplex, but this is also the case in Houston. You know, you cross the street and now you're in a different jurisdiction, and you
Right.
go a little further and now you're in a different jurisdiction. And so the ability to deploy capital, employ people, and have some level of certainty in that process gets disrupted very quickly if all of these little townships start doing different things.
Yeah. Well, let's see here. That's all I've got on my agenda here. Anything else we need to cover for the good of the order here?
I think, and I left this off when we were talking about property taxes. The House has really taken one additional step, and that's to look at business abatement programs.
Right.
You may remember Chapter 313, which was a program where capital-intensive businesses could approach school districts, and school districts being the largest portion of your property tax bill, and say, can we secure an abatement for the level of capital we're about to deploy into your district? You can still ding us on any bond payments, and we might even pay you to have almost a bonus, if you will, into your school foundation, or we'll build a road for you or something like that. But we're about to deploy tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in capital, and we don't want to have that property tax bill hit before
Yeah.
we actually open up the facility, whether it's a refinery or a data plant or something like that, or wind turbines. Really, there was a lot of different types of capital projects that fit under this umbrella. That program actually expired at the end of 2022. It was not extended last session, not extended by the session before that either. They kind of had two bites at the apple and missed on both. And so I think there was a lot of concern that the program had led to a proliferation of wind farms in the state, and that was certainly true. Although I think the federal government production
Yeah, it
incentive
had a little role.
was really what was driving that. This was just kind of icing on top of that. But they were the largest beneficiaries for sure. But there were other types of businesses that want to continue to attract capital investment to the state, and don't have the ability to seek a school district property tax abatement. And so Todd Hunter, who's the chairman of State Affairs Committee out of the Corpus Christi area, has brought House Bill 5, and he's joined by a number of pretty important co-authors, Morgan Meyer, who's the Ways and Means chairman, and then Dustin Burrows, as I mentioned earlier, who's the Calendars chairman, have signed on to this bill. And really, it's to recreate a property tax abatement program for school districts. School districts are overwhelmingly supportive of this as a way to continue to attract investment into their districts. There's quite a bit of changes made to the bill. It's not the 313 program of yore. They've really put in a lot of guardrails and protections in place to kind of avoid almost a gaming of the program, if you will, to make sure that they are getting the capital investment, they are getting some job benefits out of the program, and we're able to still kind of compete and attract that level of capital to the state. So it'll be interesting. It was heard several weeks ago in House Ways and Means. They made a big push this week to get north of 75, 76 co-authors. I think they've done that. They've secured that, and they're looking forward to moving the bill pretty quickly as part of the House's approach to property taxes. It's unclear if the changes that they've made are sufficient for the Senate to consider this. Hopefully they are. And we can continue to attract some of these big capital projects. It's tough going up against Louisiana.
Yeah, it is.
Louisiana has really structured a lot of their incentives around capital investment, and so they don't have property taxes on very large capital investment for a period of time in Louisiana. They pay for a lot of the siting and some of the interconnection costs for these big sites. And so they continue to attract refining, they continue to attract carbon capture. Some of these very big types of programs go to Louisiana. And so, you know, when we're trying to attract that type of capital investment to the state, it's tough to close those deals when you essentially you're turning down money going next door to Louisiana.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say, you know, Austin probably wouldn't have Tesla sitting out there without that program right now. And
That's right. That's right.
Part of the reason Musk moved part of his operation back to California was a big sweetheart tax incentive kind of deal that state of California was willing to give him. So,
Yeah.
you know, it's a competition between states, and Texas has all sorts of wonderful natural attributes, but you still have to compete with all these surrounding states to get that business. And it's just the way of the world these days. So anyway,
That's right.
Yeah. So I think that's everything for this week. How about that?
Perfect.
Well, thank you as
catch
always.
some more rain this weekend, and
Yeah, boy, me too.
enjoy the holiday.
Yeah, we got a little rain this week and sure did need it, man. Well, have a good weekend and we'll talk to you in a week.
Thanks, David.
All right. And thank you everyone for watching.